WYFF News 4, live local breaking news. Now on Chronicle.
This is a dangerous, deadly disease.
The COVID-19 health crisis that spanned the world.
We were in a trench warfare.
The spike is for real.
It was chaotic and it felt like just falling off of a cliff.
The devastating loss of human life.
Since there's no one else that understands kind of what we're going through.
They would die just 48 hours apart.
I'm gonna sneak a hug.
Shutdowns and isolation.
Sure, I missed you, Dad.
Overall, people are stressed right now.
How far we've come.
I thought it was still just a couple of days later, and they're like, no, Mr. Brown, you've been here for 5 weeks.
And hope for the future.
Have y'all done the vaccine yet? I think our care, our concern, our compassion for one another has not changed.
Now on Chronicle, living in a pandemic.
And welcome to Chronicle. I'm Jane Robileau. As a new decade dawned in 2020, a deadly new virus had begun creeping its way into the world. By March, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, the defining global health crisis of our time. To date, more than 2 million people have died with this virus. But through it all, there are incredible stories of kindness and hope and perseverance, as the whole world had to find a whole new way of living in a pandemic.
This is a crisis.
I've never seen anything like this.
The governor's executive order to stay home goes into effect at 5 p.m. today.
Governor McMaster urging South Carolina to stay calm as the state waits on 2 tests for COVID-19.
We will get through it by using our heads, by being smart.
The coronavirus pandemic ushered in a new lexicon. Zoom call, mask up, social distancing, and virtual everything.
And it's just a wonderful place, and to see it go quiet was very disheartening.
Once vibrant cities went silent. The new norm was playground closed, business closed, curbside pickup only, an effort to stay healthy and safe. But when things shut down, people stepped up.
We've got the wounds there, but we also have an awful lot of signs of resilience and new ways to do things, and new appreciation for what it means to pull together when we have to.
The virus that started in China quickly made its way to Europe, and by March of 2020, it was right here.
March 5th, 2020 was a historic day, even though we didn't know it at the time.
That's the last day South Carolina would report no deaths of people with COVID-19.
He said, I just need you to stop trying to save me. So they put him in hospice.
The virus was beginning to overwhelm the healthcare systems.
And by far, this is definitely the worst year that I've ever experienced as the Greenville County coroner.
For the first time ever, a mobile morgue had to be called up from Columbia.
For a while, we were over capacity, as well as funeral homes, hospital systems were getting over capacity. They were reaching their capacity, and we had nowhere to put decedents.
There was no gathering for funerals, and church became mostly virtual.
But at no point, of which I'm aware, in 2,000 years, was every Catholic church in the world closed, locked on Easter Sunday until 2020.
Businesses shut down and unemployment soared. There were disruptions in the supply chain. Food and even toilet paper became scarce.
I'm coming to get food for my family, man.
The required social distancing also took an emotional toll.
Have some increase in anxiety, but more increase in depression.
Hospitals suspended elective surgeries to handle demands from the virus, and there was no more in-person learning.
Effective immediately, I've ordered the closing of all schools in the state of South Carolina.
How do you teach that online? Over a weekend, we had to figure out how we were going to teach 9 more weeks of school.
Through it all, resilience and innovation.
Hey, Dad, how you doing today?
May be what best describe our response to COVID-19.
And while in person we cannot come together, we're still checking on one another. We're still calling one another. We're still doing Zoom calls. We're still doing Facebook Live and other social media.
Parks and outdoor spaces found a new way to reopen, reconnecting people with nature.
So it's been exciting to get out.
I don't remember last time I put my backpack on. Me too.
Everyone sacrificed to flatten the curve of new cases, but it would only go so far.
I think the biggest thing is the vaccinations.
We know for sure that these vaccines are highly efficacious with a good safety record.
Vaccines developed in record time would hold the greatest promise for a return to life after COVID.
And I hope people will reflect on the fact that it was good science and good healthcare professionals who worked on it and led to the phenomenon of 3 different vaccines. And maybe we need to be listening to those people.
And so far, about half of American adults have gotten at least 1 dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, and nearly 30% are fully vaccinated. In South Carolina, more than 2.5 million doses have been administered so far, over 6.2 million doses in North Carolina, and more than 5 million doses in Georgia. One of the tragedies of this disease is suffering it alone. No hospital visitations meant that many died without a loved one present. Kylie Jones introduces us to a family who lost both parents to COVID-19 complications, a couple who did everything together right up until the end.
Does Jesus care when my heart is pained?
In order for there to be comfort, there must also be trouble and heartache.
As the burdened prince. Without them, without my parents, I don't know that I would be the man that I am.
A goodbye twice as hard.
Coming to terms with the loss and them not being here, and given that they died just about 3 months ago, I think we're feeling kind of the buildup of realizing that this is where we're actually saying goodbye.
Almost 56 years spent side by side, Bonnie and Hartley Krueger left the world together.
I think it's just the suddenness of them being gone within 48 hours. It was a shock. And so I don't know if we'll ever get totally over that.
Just before Christmas, the husband and wife got COVID-19. In a turn of events, Hartley died on January 4th. Just 48 hours later, Bonnie died on the 6th.
In one sense, there's no one else that understands kind of what we're going through, but we each do.
Almost 3 months later, the loss doesn't get easier.
Even though our parents shared the same birthday, August 28th, and shared the same wedding date, obviously, it never occurred to me that they would die just 48 hours apart.
Yet their son Dan says it just made sense for them to leave the world together. And what better day to celebrate them than what would have been their 56th wedding anniversary.
It's a special day, but there's both a hard side and a sweet side to it.
Today there's this intense feeling of grief just under the surface that I know is going to come out.
A celebration built on music and God, 2 things Bonnie and Hartley lived by.
Hear them play was one of the funnest things as a child. And I thought it was normal that everybody else had parents that played music like they did.
Remembering their bond over music through one of their favorite songs. More importantly, remembering the bond the 2 instilled in their 3 sons.
Whenever we fought as kids, which we did a lot, he'd always tell us when things calmed down, as he'd say, someday you guys will be all you have.
That message finally coming to fruition.
He'd always say you need to love each other because someday you'll need each other when we're not here.
Many families of those who passed during the pandemic have chosen to delay celebration of life services until loved ones and friends are able to safely gather. For hospitals, it didn't take long to become overwhelmed. Frontline healthcare workers pulling exhausting hours as hospitals shifted away from elective surgeries to dedicate their workforce to COVID-19 cases. And as Alan Devlin tells us, for some who became ill with COVID-19, it meant much more than a 10 or 14-day quarantine.
I was in the hospital for 62 days. Is how long I was there.
A journey that's yet to end for Jerry Brown Jr.
My foot, for instance, as I say, it's 85% dead. Still having some respiratory issues. That's why I'm on this oxygen. I can touch it, and I know I'm touching it, but I can't feel it.
December 28th, he was diagnosed with COVID-19. A couple of days later, he found it hard to breathe. He was rushed to Greenville Memorial Hospital.
And I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be up here a couple of days, and they'll pump me full of medicine, and I'll get better and go home. You know, that'll be the end of it.
The last thing he remembers, the night of January 5th, right before he was put on a ventilator and in a medically induced coma for 5 weeks straight.
I didn't know. I thought it was still just a couple of days later, and they're like, no, Mr. Brown, you've been here for 5 weeks or something like that. And I'm like, what? The doctor actually called my wife at one period and told her that you might need to make some hard decisions. We don't know that he's going to survive or not. He's in a very bad place.
It feels like we were in a trench warfare. We were all in the trenches.
And that's a call Dr. Syed Malik, director of the AnMed Health ICU, had to make many times over the last year.
We weren't ready mentally, emotionally, to deal with the onslaught of so many patients, so many sick people, so many people dying.
For nearly 14 months, infected patients terrified of this new viral disease, doctors facing the unknown right along with them.
There were some really difficult and dark weeks, I would say, not just days, weeks, where things looked very, very difficult. But we got through it.
But for Brown,
I'll just say it the best way I know how to say it in my own words. The Lord wasn't finished with me yet on this earth for some reason.
His story, not one of sadness. His story, one of healing.
One of the doctors told me, he said, you had your hand on death's doorknob. You just didn't turn the knob and walk through the door.
Healing and recovery, still on oxygen and still walking with a cane.
I get around fairly well. Time will tell.
Living proof of the toll of the coronavirus, but living proof of the power of faith, a slow journey forward, but a journey forward nonetheless.
I believe the Lord just wasn't finished with me. He's got something for me to do here. I don't know what it is, and I'm sure he'll show me in his time, but he let me live, and he kept me, and he saved me. So that's the way I look at it. He wasn't done with me, so he let me live. He pulled me through this.
And Jerry Brown is continuing weekly therapy treatments. He says he's happy to be home with his family. For those who survived the disease, each day is a blessing. During the height of the shutdowns, many people had to turn to one another for their most basic of needs.
All of a sudden, I don't have a paycheck, and where am I going to go get food?
Still to come on Chronicle, living in a pandemic, working to keep food on tables and hope in homes of the upstate.
It was tough. It's still tough, obviously.
And small businesses navigating the COVID-19 crisis. Innovation and determination are keeping their doors open and keeping employees in their jobs.
Light. WYFF News 4.
We get the impact of this pandemic when we see it through the eyes of those who went hungry because of it. At Harvest Hope Food Bank, Michael Cogdill shows us how the long lines of 2020 help illustrate the story of unemployment and very real, very basic need.
A long-term economic agenda. The agency says the average showed that the state's unemployment rate was at 5.2%. And that's your news 733.
It is kindness.
On some days, the line is completely around the building.
By the ton. John Nix keeps it moving.
It's a constant process.
Because they keep coming.
It's a necessity at this point. I'm coming to get food for my family, man.
John Langley's disabled, a musician. COVID made things worse for his household of 6.
We're struggling just to feed everybody.
The growl of that forklift, like the very sound of so many who would be hungry.
and served over about 1.1 million meals in 2020.
Harvest Hope Food Bank feeds tens of thousands each year. About 1 in 5 are children.
Children are, and sometimes in school, singled out because they have a behavior issue, but really the issue is food insecurity.
They're hungry.
They're hungry.
Good morning.
3 days a week now, people line up.
Go right here. Go right here.
It's been a godsend, man.
How are you doing today?
And volunteers alongside the National
How
Guard
many is in your household?
6.
They're going to load you on the end down there.
give them food.
Pop your trunk and pull forward.
Morning, how are you? The Upstate Director, Dane Boudreau, will tell you the pandemic made the grind of moving it all the more vital.
There you go, morning. We've seen an 87% increase in the number of individuals served from 2019 to 2020.
87% more people struggling to put food on the table. Remember that impossibly long line we showed you last year as the pandemic hit the economy? So many suddenly unemployed, never expecting to need this.
They are relying on us to serve them week after week, month after month.
I've never wanted charity in my life, but this is something that actually is helping us to survive at this point.
The lines are a little shorter now, but the need still runs deep for people like John Langley.
I haven't done this up until about a year ago.
Who see and feel what it's like to come here.
You know, I don't feel so bad when I see cars wrapped around about a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile down the road behind me, knowing that I'm, not the only one in the situation.
They come here and they see what's going on, and you almost can't believe this is America, right? Like, why do we have such a big problem?
So yes, a year later, fewer people out front. Lines a little shorter, but there's less on the shelves. It's simple economics. Food sells better, there's less to donate, and so, as you can see, there's a lot less to give.
You can just see the need and how thankful they are that they're getting, anything right now.
I'm going to keep doing this until it's not necessary.
An average year, they still move meals by the millions through here.
I mean, I don't want to take something that we really don't need.
We're every day debating it right now. Can we continue to serve? Can we add days?
Perhaps now with more gratitude than ever.
Yeah, I thank God every day they do this up here,
All set, sir. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
For the kindness.
And these people have been fantastic for us here.
Of strangers.
It's helped us tremendously.
By the ton.
Last April, our Day for Giving telethon raised more than $300,000 for Harvest Hope Food Bank. That's almost 1.5 million meals, and that's thanks to you, caring selflessly for your neighbors in need. Now, while unemployment skyrocketed, many small business owners had to shut down completely, laying off their whole workforce. Others could innovate, changing the way they serve their customers. Our Taggart Houck shows us the resiliencies of these men and women who even now aren't sure what's on the horizon.
Early 2020, businesses around the nation and the world faced unexpected challenges. In the upstate, the city of Greenville implemented an ordinance restricting indoor dining.
We felt like we needed to make a decision that was going to be effective, and that's what we're trying to do now.
A statewide mandate from Governor Henry McMaster would follow.
It is now time to make these recommended actions required.
Putting restaurants into new territory. Some sold toilet paper.
Thank you, sir. You're welcome, sir.
Distilleries repurposed alcohol.
Sanitizer, don't drink it. Rum, you drink it.
Curbside pickup became the norm, selling directly from the kitchen.
We're between that grocery store and a restaurant right now, and that's uncharted, and we don't have any boundaries on it.
Chairs on tables and an empty dining room. That week was among the toughest of Adam Hayes' life, laying off more than 90% of his staff.
I went to speak and I just lost. And then that's like a waterfall of emotions for everybody, because
even now it's hard to look back. Glasses are set, but the future still isn't clear.
What we're finding is our teams are some of them are really new. Some of them are new to the business. I mean, one of our restaurants, full turnover. I mean, we had to hire at every position.
Ali Safi stayed true on his promise to keep all employees on the payroll.
I see people work here, then a few years later, their brother joined us. Then a few years after that, the sister joined us. that put together didn't even allow me to let my mind go where, how long can I afford this?
I know how many of these restaurant owners suffered during the last year, but they were all aboard in terms of, hey, we want to put our customers first, we want to put our employees first.
Greenville area businesses took a pledge to mask up and promote social distancing. Federal loans like the Paycheck Protection Program became a lifeline. Greenville County distributed more than $8 million in CARES Act funding to small and minority-owned businesses, and the city of Greenville offered public-private funding for small businesses up to $1,000 each.
It was a morale booster. It tells them we care, but I had plenty of businesses who said, no, actually that really helped me this month in paying my back utility bills.
There were many hardships in downtown Greenville. 13 businesses closed, but the city says 9 new businesses opened during the pandemic, others on the way.
A bit of an anomaly here. One food truck business in Malden really wasn't making any money because of COVID-19, and so at a time when restrictions were at an all-time high, they found new hope in brick and mortar.
I didn't want to do it. I just gonna take my chances with the food truck. My dad was like, man, listen, we can't do nothing but lose some money.
Thank you. Have a great one.
And Barbecue Inside for James Hester opened up new clientele. He moved here during the beginning of the pandemic. COVID-19 precautions in effect and will be for a while.
It's because of the grace of God and the good people of the upstate that we've been able to sustain in this time, that we're here.
And through it all, lessons have been learned. Upstate businesses have proven they are resilient, even if they don't know what the future holds.
If anything, it put us closer. I mean, you know, we're a tight-knit group as it is, but when you're forced in that situation where, you know, that is the team, you got to all do what you got to do.
And even now, as public health officials worry about a new surge of cases, many businesses have to work around distancing measures that keep them from operating at 100%. But others tell WYFF News 4 that their primary concern is that their customers feel safe. They're comfortable with a slower return to normal, as long as that means getting back to real business.
I had no idea what it would look like teaching virtually live.
Still to come on Chronicle, living in a pandemic. Teachers, parents, and students learning a new lesson and becoming homeschoolers in an instant. The quick adaptation to learning and teaching remotely.
It's okay to talk over the phone, but when you can actually feel somebody and get them a pat on the back, it's a big difference.
And later, a reunion more than a year in the making. A father and son can finally embrace their first hug, first in-person visit after a long, long lockdown.
If this is your kind of day.
For live local breaking news.
Technology has never proven more important than in this pandemic. Schools had to weigh the health risks to their students and personnel against the void of academics. But soon enough, virtual school grew into a reality that filled some of that gap. Kylie Jones gives us a glimpse into what it took to get there.
This is the hardest job I've ever had in my entire life.
It was chaotic and it felt like just falling off of a cliff.
There was no textbook.
We are reviewing today because we have a test coming up.
For these lessons.
I had no idea what it would look like teaching virtually live.
There's some reading passages on there.
You had ideas, but it's kind of nerve-wracking when it's like, school's starting next week, and I literally have no idea how I'm pulling this off.
Teachers thought they were going home for the weekend.
We did not really get time to think.
Effective immediately.
It was so abrupt.
Nearly overnight.
I've ordered the closing.
That turned into teaching from home.
Of all schools in the state of South Carolina.
For months.
I literally set my camera up here.
Starting tomorrow.
And set my welder up and weld something.
Monday, March 16th.
Show them how to do that, whatever position I was doing it in, and hope I could capture it all and get it all out.
Parents feeling the pain on the other side of the camera.
Just the auditory stimulation and being overwhelmed by it and seeing the pictures of people flashing, you know, going and hiding under a table, you know, from it and not being able to coax them out.
A new battle seemingly every day. different for every family.
For most people, losing a year of quality in-person education is really difficult, and it can be a struggle, but for a kid with special needs, it can be devastating to the entire route of their life.
Teachers also trying to navigate the virtual world.
Welcome to others just showing up. Welcome Harold, Shamar, Kamaria.
Others,
how many of you eat? How many of you drink water?
Got back in the classroom, but that too was far from normal.
We are teaching in pods, and there we have physical barriers. We had to reinvent lunch, our classrooms, transition.
It put teachers to the test.
That responsibility that we have to teach and to keep our students well and safe and learning, and doing that amidst a lot of fear, really shows a tremendous commitment on our teachers' behalf.
Parents,
looking back, I can honestly say that we did the very best that we could.
And the kids.
You know, they're struggling emotionally a lot of times. You don't think that.
People are tired. Everyone is tired, but yet they keep on going.
So today is super important because we have to review.
Persevere, do what you know is right, and keep doing what is right. And in the end, it's going to turn out okay.
The South Carolina House has passed a resolution to require students to be back fully in person 5 days a week starting April 26th. The Senate will take that up next week.
I was in an abusive situation, and it was bad. It was terrible.
Ahead, how the pandemic led to an increase in domestic violence. Hear from a survivor and see how a community stepped up to help in a time of great need. That's next on Chronicle, Living in a Pandemic.
I can't think of anything that makes you feel better in that moment than knowing that you're not alone.
Plus, life in a pandemic, it takes a toll on mental health, how loss of work, income, and time with loved ones has left an indelible mark on our well-being, and how some are making it through together while physically apart.
Something that I worked for.
And watch WYFF News 4 today.
The mandated quarantine at home put some strains on people who live under the same roof. But in cases where violence was already a part of the household, the problems were compounded. Safe Harbor tells Gabrielle Komorowski that the number of calls to law enforcement related to domestic violence has gone up dramatically during the pandemic. And that happened just as the financial support for that shelter plunged.
The racks of gently used clothing, shoes, and furniture at the Safe Harbor resale shop on Wade Hampton Boulevard in Greenville County come from donations. And when an item is sold, the money makes a difference.
The income that we make in the resale store goes directly back into the programs of Safe Harbor.
Executive Director Becky Callahan says the resale shop had to close for months and fundraisers were canceled because of the pandemic. The money stopped coming in. The nonprofit estimates a loss of $300,000 in 2020.
By the end of the year, we were faced with an enormous decrease in funding and an enormous increase in need.
According to Safe Harbor, Greenville ranks #1 in the number of incidents of domestic violence in South Carolina. South Carolina is number 11 in the country in the number of deaths of women by men. Callahan says the pandemic has made things worse.
It created that tipping point of isolation, unemployment. We're seeing the people who are asking us for help, the types of abuse are more and more violent and more degrading.
I was in an abusive situation, and it was bad. It was terrible.
Hubertine Silcott says Safe Harbor saved her life.
Didn't know where I was going to go. As a matter of fact, I was hiding out at a hotel until I got into contact with Safe Harbor. They sent the police out to escort me there. So from the beginning, I felt very safe. I went there with nothing. No clothing, just what was on my back. I had no money.
But the pandemic has reduced how many domestic violence survivors Safe Harbor can help.
Last year, we turned away 230 families.
Michelle Gilbert, the director of shelter advocacy, says social distancing and capacity requirements mean these shelters can't hold as many people. One shelter was able to serve 30 people at this time last year. Now they can only serve 11.
And there's so many barriers that are present to even get them to the point to access help, and then help not be available is absolutely heartbreaking and should be heartbreaking for everyone in our community because it's a community problem.
You can help by shopping at the resale store, making a donation.
Anybody who's receiving services from Safe Harbor can get a voucher and shop for free.
Or giving a financial contribution to help someone who needs it.
And last month, WYFF News 4 held a virtual telethon to raise money for Safe Harbor. Thanks to your generosity, more than $126,000 was raised. And if you'd like to continue to help Safe Harbor, the ways to give are on your screen right there. All of us here at WYFF News 4, thank you. For many people, stress, depression, and anxiety grew in a world where a simple hug could be dangerous. In many ways, the pandemic shook us to our core. Carol Clark with One Man's Story.
You have all you need. The Upstate live music scene pre-pandemic. Bands, venues. Even an Upstate Music Awards to honor the best of the best. Then COVID-19 hit. Everything shut down.
Professionally, I mean, I write about live shows for a living, and they were gone. So, you know, it was like everything was gone in a snap.
Vincent Harris contributes to newspapers statewide.
I did some quick math, and by the end of April, I realized I had lost about 75% of my income in a month and a half span.
Spoleto Festival USA has begun.
When his big yearly event, the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, was canceled, reality really hit.
That's when it started becoming very pronounced that it was clear to me that I was very depressed.
And he wasn't alone in his pandemic reaction.
I've seen people, have some increase in anxiety, but more increase in depression.
A survey by the U.S. Census Bureau in December found 42% of those asked reported symptoms of either anxiety or depression. Compare that to 11% the year before. Younger adults had it harder than older people. Over half of adults ages 18 to 24 reported anxiety and depression. Less than a third of adults over 65 had those symptoms. Black and Hispanic communities had higher rates of COVID-19 and COVID deaths. They reported more anxiety and depression too.
What I see is that people have sort of the normal expected health challenges, and then it's compounded by the pandemic and having to stay home and having fear about going out.
Greenville therapist Ginger Culbertson says she took her practice online when the pandemic ramped up last year.
I'm talking to people for, 4 to 6 or 7 hours every day over the internet. They found out what their limits to isolation really are. So what did we talk about last time, and what have you been working with since last time we met?
She encourages people to stay updated on best precautions, use good judgment, and find a way to reach out to other people. That's what Vincent did, reaching out virtually.
Every time I have put something on social media about the way I was feeling in a certain moment, desperate or depressed or sad or like I needed help, someone has gotten in touch with me and said, I feel the same way. I can't think of anything that makes you feel better in that moment than knowing that you're not alone.
He recently got vaccinated. He's hopeful about the end of the pandemic coming soon. And he's ready for the music again.
And Vincent Harris says the finalists have been chosen for the Upstate Music Awards. Ginger Culbertson tells us that she plans to do a mix of virtual and in-person counseling. And as for the Spoleto Festival, well, it will go on this year, but at 25% capacity. Extended care facilities were ground zero for COVID-19 cases and deaths in South Carolina. Through last week, more than 1 in 5 COVID-19 deaths in the state was at a patient at an extended care facility. For months on end, assisted living centers were closed to visitors. One upstate man tells us he counted the days until he was able to see his father again, to give him a hug in the nursing home. Our Alan Devlin was there to catch the moment that was 1 year in the making.
I'm very excited about it. This is a day that I've been waiting for quite a while.
David Paris is taking the final steps of what has been a year-long journey of lost time.
Is this where I check in?
It is. Because of COVID-19 nursing home restrictions, it's been 368 days since he last saw his 88-year-old father, Paul, in person.
Hey, Dad, how you doing today?
Since March 13th of last year, the extent of their contact, FaceTimes and Zoom calls.
Bye. Bye, Dad.
But today,
You ready for this? I've been ready for a long time. You have no idea.
that long wait coming to an end.
Hey, Dad, how you doing? I'm gonna sneak a hug. Sure, I missed you, Dad. I missed you too, man. I know.
As nursing homes around the state open back up, reunions just like this one are made possible. Father and son, distanced for so long, able to once again share simple moments, minutes, seconds, once overlooked.
That's your youngest great-grandson. You've never met him before.
Time to catch up on things missed.
Hey, what are you doing?
A family reunion of sorts, and share a room with someone, share that touch with someone you love the most.
Years a long time, you know, to touch someone. So I know that he had to miss the personal touch. I mean, it means, I'm sorry. It means a lot to us.
And so there they sat, in and out of conversations, as the clock ticked on, their best attempt to make up for lost time.
It was great, wasn't it, Dad? It's okay to talk over the phone, but when you can actually feel somebody and get them a pat on the back, it's a big difference, isn't it? Yeah, it is.
It's going to be great to welcome people back this year.
Next, a return to the ballpark. Athletes and coaches getting back in the game as they reflect on a lost season for some and a very different one for others. That's ahead on Chronicle, Living in a Pandemic.
Chevy is America's fastest growing.
In many ways, the sudden shuttering of the sports world signified just how quickly this new virus had invaded our lives. After months of no televised competition, some leagues considered best practices to play through a pandemic. Others didn't even have the chance. Sports director Mark Whiteman on a year of cancellations and curveballs on the field of play.
Fans, due to unforeseen circumstances, the game tonight has been postponed.
On Wednesday, March 11th, 2020, Utah's game in Oklahoma City was postponed when Rudy Gobert became the NBA's first known case of COVID-19. By the end of the night, the NBA had suspended its season. By the end of the week, the sports world had ground to a halt.
The NCAA has made the decision to cancel the men's and women's tournament.
Those first few days while things were being shut down, I think we learned a lot about the idea that we didn't know very much. What that first part taught us is our need to be adaptable.
Harvick wins NASCAR's return to action at Darlington.
As leagues began to return and a college football season came into view, Clemson spent 4 to 5 months building a detailed plan that led to 19,000 in Death Valley.
We really started to model out our stadium and started at what does 6 feet of social distance yield in terms of a capacity. What that came out to in this stadium is between 19 and 21%.
With limited capacity crowds and socially distanced seatbacks, Clemson was at least able to approximate a full athletic season throughout the fall, while some, like the Greenville Drive, were forced to grapple with no season at all.
Yeah, not gonna lie, it was pretty depressing to come in here last summer every day, walking around the ballpark, seeing it completely empty, knowing that we weren't gonna have a season.
Instead, the Drive got creative, partnering with the United Way and hosting socially distanced events, trick-or-treating at Halloween, and an Upstate Salute Veterans Day concert, earning Baseball America's coveted Freedis Award for their community service.
While baseball is the product out on the field, our business is really about making memories and impacting folks in this community.
Seasons were impacted, so were participants.
The first time, it didn't kick my tail the way this one kicked my tail.
South Carolina's Frank Martin tested positive twice, and Clemson defensive lineman Justin Foster retired due to long-term complications associated with his asthma.
Some of the doctors have mentioned that, they don't know if it could be a month from now or it could be a year from now, but it seems like it's going to be a longer period of time than we would like.
Foster at peace with his decision, his alma mater cautiously optimistic about a healthy stadium full of cheering fans this fall.
I think we will view it with a new appreciation, and I think at that point, I think there's a symbolic understanding that a lot of the individuals in the stadium will have done what was required to overcome what was a very difficult circumstance.
It's going to be great to welcome people back this year and see some familiar faces that we haven't seen in close to 20 months.
Indeed it will. Though Clemson football finished third in the nation in national attendance last year, the athletic department says they still took a huge financial hit. They estimate the deficit for their fiscal year will be as much as $25 million.
We went from having 3 services on a Sunday morning to now 1 virtual service.
Next on Chronicle, living in a pandemic, keeping the faith in times of utmost uncertainty. Churches changing the way they minister, reaching their congregations through a virtual path.
You've always wanted a lawn that you could be proud of.
Wake up and watch WYFF News 4 today.
Most Americans say their faith is strengthened in times of crisis. But what happens when a pandemic changes even the expression of that belief? Carol Clark talked with 3 upstate pastors and found with this pandemic, all 3 face the biggest challenges of their ministries.
March of last year.
It happened very gradually until suddenly it was worse.
Suddenly worse. Mid-month when everything shut down.
We didn't realize that the world was going to shut down as quickly as it did.
Faced with finding new ways to be a congregation.
I think our care, our concern, our compassion for one another has not changed.
But in April of 2020, the celebration of Easter had to change. Churches offered Facebook Live or YouTube services if they could.
Then on Sunday, I never imagined Easter with no people in the room.
Neither did Father J. Scott Newman of Greenville St. Mary's Catholic Church. Easter Sunday was usually standing room only. In 2020, this.
I stood there by myself, tears streaming down my cheeks, because the people who should be here weren't.
They weren't at Long Branch Baptist Church either.
Things have changed dramatically. We went from having 3 services on a Sunday morning to now 1 virtual service.
For months, all 3 pastors looked for ways to hold their congregations together. For Michael Turner at Advent United Methodist, COVID was yet one more challenge. Fire destroyed the sanctuary in 2017. The rebuilding finished just months before the pandemic hit.
Turn to somebody next to you in your living room, on your back porch.
Virtual church became the norm, with occasional outdoor services featuring disposable communion packets.
Celebrate and worship the risen Lord Jesus.
Over 2020, with precautions, some churches slowly reopened to in-person worship. 6-foot spacers for seating. Some pews were closed. Cleaning routines stepped up. At St. Mary's, even the heating and cooling system was checked.
We verified the functionality of the system, and we're well pleased at the rate of exchange, so that no air was lingering in the building for more than a moment.
If masks weren't required, they were strongly suggested.
How are you today?
Not bad.
Good.
At Long Branch Baptist, services continue virtually.
You focus on God's Word!
But in-person touch, the ministry is still there. Albeit masked and gloved at events like the regular food distribution pickup. All 3 pastors pray this pandemic ends soon, but they know lessons will linger.
I don't think we'll ever go back to all in-person gatherings. I mean, there will always be some sort of hybrid.
There have been conversations that we've had in the last year that we've not had in the last decade. I believe conversation brings about conviction, and conviction brings about change.
It reminded us that nothing can be taken for granted. And if we can emerge from the pandemic wiser, more compassionate, then even good things can come from bad.
All three pastors tell Carol that they were able to reach out and help other churches get through the crisis this past year.
It is a huge, huge blessing that people now are able to get back in, start seeing their folks face to face.
The discoveries we made in the year of shutdown and isolation, and how it's making us stronger for the years to come. That's next on Chronicle, Living in a Pandemic.
Chevy is America's fastest.
That's a big relief.
The real value at looking back over tough times is in finding those little jewels, those little pearls of knowledge and experience and innovation that we'll use to make us stronger moving forward.
Happy birthday to you.
Mickey Rector is celebrating 100 years of life in 2021.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. Somebody was saying this was the first 100th birthday they've been to. It was the first one I've been to, too. Yeah.
Mickey's sense of humor has guided her through some big events in her century here.
You know, she went through the Depression. She went through World War II.
But in 2020, on her 99th birthday, the coronavirus pandemic presented her with a whole new challenge.
You know, we celebrated last year by signing a picture window.
For 49 long weeks, Mickey's visits with her son Chuck could only be through the glass and over the phone. In March of 2020, the virus was already taking such a deep toll on nursing home residents, so the governor imposed visitation restrictions.
It is a huge, huge blessing that people now are able to get back in, start seeing their folks face to face. Happy birthday to you.
Chuck and Mickey and everyone at her nursing home have now been vaccinated against the virus.
So not only is she 100, she's out, so you're out of jail for the day.
It's a real pretty day.
This year of social distancing and isolation heightened our understanding of the depth of our need for human touch. The South Carolina Department of Mental Health says that given their extensive work in crisis and disaster response, they expect a higher need for their services post-pandemic. And another deep vulnerability was exposed: inequality in health care.
I mean, we saw the same in South Carolina and Greenville County. We saw what we saw across the country, where minority groups and lower income people who clearly did not have the health care, that they were most vulnerable to the COVID early on.
South Carolina DHEC reports that although the black community maintains high rates of testing for COVID-19, they still see the highest rates of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths in the state.
That's a huge issue. It has to be addressed.
The food insecurity of even this community is still real. It doesn't go away because of a public pandemic.
And gaping holes of community need were exposed. Many of those were quickly addressed through public-private partnerships.
Have y'all done the vaccine yet? Both of them. Okay. You have done both of them. All right, way to go.
Those missions will go on.
We had to make sure that we continue to provide those type of services to our community.
We've stayed pretty healthy over the years, I guess.
1 year into the pandemic, there's a renewed hope seen through the lens of a centurion. Together, we can make it through and come out even stronger.
This is just a fabulous, fabulous day.
Over this year, we have seen and experienced the unimaginable hardships of living in a pandemic. We will never forget the precious lives that were lost. And we thank the brave men and women who risked their own health while working on the front lines, the educators who guided our children, and the many generous people who've brought comfort to their neighbors in need. We don't know when this health crisis will end, but we did witness the strength and perseverance of the human spirit. And we know that will endure even after the pandemic. Thank you for joining us for Chronicle, Living in a Pandemic. I'm Jane Robileau. Good night.
Jet, toss me the Frisbee.
I could do you one better.